Thank you for coming. This is going to be an interactive session. The doors will be locked in a moment, so you can't change your minds. As you probably gathered from the handout, I'm Allan Kelly. This session is about dialogue sheets. I'm not going to bore you with any slides. If you want to get in contact afterwards, Allan at allankelly.net, www.allankelly.net, and Allan Kelly, on Twitter, whatever you like. Yeah. My contact details and so on are around. If you've not seen me before, I do all sorts of things to go under the umbrella of Agile, but frankly, what Agile is, we'd have to have a long discussion over that. It's about making your teams, your organisations better. I just happen to think most of the tools for doing that, or the best tools we have at the moment, the best known tools at the moment, happen to be tools that go under the Agile umbrella. So, yeah. One of those tools, although it didn't originate in Agile, I can change that, is retrospectives. What we're going to do here is simulate a retrospective using these sheets, give you some experience of doing it, and then we'll debrief and talk about it. These are facilitator-less retrospectives. You don't need a facilitator for this. Some Scrum Mastery types like to hold back and observe as a kind of facilitator, but frankly, there's very little for them to do. If you've got a larger team, sometimes the teams will split into 2 or 3 and do a sheet independently, and then there might be a role for bringing them back together. But largely, these are self-organising retrospectives. The sheets can be used in other settings. I've got one here, which is about customers and products. I'm starting to extend the use of the sheets into more of the requirement side of things, get people to have conversations about what they're going to build, rather than retrospecting at the end. I've also got one sheet, which I haven't got here, which looks even more like a Monopoly board than these sheets do. A lot of people, when they see these sheets, say they look like a Monopoly board. Given that, I eventually got round to creating a sheet that looks more like a Monopoly board, and that is to help you run planning meetings. And a bit like Monopoly, you try and go around the board, and it keeps sending you back to do more, and you pile up the work you want to do on cards in the middle, and it tells you what to do, and just kind of guides you through planning meetings. So retrospectives is the main use for these sheets, but there's a few other applications. I didn't invent the original concept, they invented a Swedish university, but all these sheets, and they're using software, so I pioneered using software, and I've designed all these sheets. Some people have designed their own sheets. There's no copyright on these ideas, you can do it. If you like the sheets, there's a URL on there, www.dialoguesheets. It goes to my website and you can download these sheets for free. All you need is a big enough printer. How many of you do retrospectives at the moment? Okay, a bit over 50%. What do you do in them? What kind of format do you generally take?
It changed from the last few weeks, but before that, normally through all the people in the team, and everyone is saying what was the good thing that happened, the bad thing that happened, that needs to be improved. The problem with that now, the team is, I think, 9 or 10 people. So we're putting that on a web page.
Yes.
Someone of us is typing this while we're talking, and then it's a pretty big chunk of text. It's not used after that really, and as I think of it, I think it's good to have something after each retrospective so we know what to do.
Yeah.
For the last few weeks we changed that, we don't ask everyone for this, we just as a team try to capture a few bad things, a few good things, and a few improvements. Just make it less so we can try to improve faster.
Right. So it's just like an informal conversation, either around the table or genuinely as to what you should do?
Yeah, just a question like, what do you think happened this sprint, what did you like on the sprint, what you didn't like, what do you think are the problems, how we can improve, do you think something, and just everyone saying that in front of everyone else, trying to find the problems and solve them.
Is that similar to the rest of you? Yours?
Yes, it's quite similar, but it's sort of an open discussion where anyone can talk, so it's not like you go around. But people give their feedback on what they enjoyed, what they found difficult when sort of blockages were.
Yeah.
Or it's been sort of business side of them.
Mainly business side, blockages with the business, or the business complaining about blockages.
It's mainly problems about the business in terms of requirements and changing. That's what sort of delays are.
Yeah.
That's
Do the requirements people come to the retrospectives?
Not all of them. We usually get about 1 or 2 representatives in the team, or about 5 people.
So that can be quite a problem if the problems you come up with are outside the scope of the people who are having a retrospective, the people who have to come to hear it, and then you have to go to them and tell them something. Anyone else?
We run, so I've got a number of Scrum teams that work for me, and Scrum Masters decide on their own format. They vary from the approach that you guys have taken to everyone's getting post-its, writing happy faces, smiley faces, and putting comments, and then they coordinate those. The retrospective starts with a review of the last retrospective, the decisions that were put into there, and how they achieved those.
Okay.
They then go into review of the last sprint, and then they prioritise the things that they're going to try to achieve in the next sprint.
That's good. I think maybe one advantage of having multiple teams doing different things is they can perhaps learn and steal from each other over time.
Yeah.
And one of the traps of retrospectives is they can get a bit dull and a bit bored. If you do the same thing, you were almost saying, if you do the same thing time and time again, it starts to become a bit samey, and sometimes the same problems come up and you can't rectify them. You almost get into a bit of a negative spin that we didn't solve it last time, we aren't going to solve it this time. And it can become a little bit boring, maybe even disheartening. I had a friend once who was Scrum Mastering at the BBC, and every 2 weeks they held their retrospective, and every 2 weeks, without fail, the team came up with an idea for improving their test coverage. Their test coverage stood at something like 98.6. But every retrospective, the team wanted to talk about test coverage and how they could get it higher. At 98.6, increasing it even by a whole % wasn't going to give you a great deal of improvement. And they'd fall into a trap where they hadn't got negative, but it just kept going over the same ground. Sometimes you need to break it out, and sometimes the way to break it out is to jazz things up, try something different. Was it you over here who said you also had retrospectives?
Yes, it's similar to Mr. Jones here, but it's more developed. And from that, sometimes it can take a path where it's quite technical, and the BAs and product managers, sometimes it can lose its meaning in that sense.
Yeah. So it's kind of interesting. This is another thing that comes up, because typically the developers on a team are the biggest group. And if the developers decide to go in a certain direction, that's the direction the retrospective will go in. And so as you say, the BAs and maybe the testers and other people, developers being technical again. And there was one team I came across, and they started a retrospective, they put all the issues on the table, and they talked about which ones they were going to talk about in depth. And because the developers are always the biggest group, they always talk about developer issues. And the PAs and the testers were a bit fed up of always talking about technical stuff, and they weren't getting their voice heard, they weren't talking about from their angle. Interestingly, the build server's gone off again. I assume we don't have to evacuate. So this team, we did these retrospective dialogue sheets with them. And we divided, so what you can do if you've got a large team, these sheets work well if you've got between about 3 and 8. Below 3 people, you can't really have a discussion because it's more of a one-on-one conversation. So when you've got about 3 people, you have a proper discussion. When you get to about 8, these sheets tend not to work so well because it's physically difficult to seat 8 people around this sheet. So once you get above 8 people, I typically say break into 2 smaller groups, or even 3 smaller groups, whatever. If you've got 20 people, then you have 3 separate groups. Have the groups do the sheets independently, and then compare the results at the end. So with these guys, with the BAs, when we split them up, we end up with the developers on one sheet, and the BAs and the testers on another. And afterwards, the BAs and the testers said it was so good because we got to talk about our issues, not the developer issues. For once, we were able to talk about the problems we face. Interestingly, although the 2 teams had talked about different issues, they come to the same conclusions, that something, part of the interface of the team needed to change. It's kind of interesting. And that same technique also works where you've got distributed teams. So, and I'll get you doing the sheets in a moment. There's a couple of stories I've heard about distributed teams. The one that sticks in my mind is a Siemens team, where part of the team was in Philadelphia and part of the team was in Bangalore. And the Scrum Master got these sheets, and she was in Philadelphia, she got one printed for the Philadelphia team, and she got somebody in Bangalore to get one printed for the Bangalore team. And on the same day, if not exactly the same time, the two sub-teams completed the sheets in their own time. Come on in. Oh, it's the cameraman. They completed the sheets in their own time, and then they compared the answers. So it's a much easier thing to do remotely. It's just to compare the final state where the teams got to. So rather than go on and on, let's get you to do these sheets. There are 3 different sheets on the tables. These themselves are not actually retrospective sheets. There's, if you go to the website, you will find these sheets plus some which are specifically for retrospectives. Some of them, I think I call them the T1 sheet and the T3 sheet. One of the first questions asks you, what do you want to consider? What period of time? What is the boundaries of this retrospective? And from there, the rest of the questions follow on based on what you've defined. The sheet, which I call T4, picks up where the others leave off and say, what were your action items from the last retrospective? Have you done them? What has changed, etc., etc. The main sheet, which I see teams use most of the time, is a sprint retrospective sheet. So that just assumes you've done a sprint, be it 2 weeks, 1 week, 4 weeks, whatever. And the language on the sheet talks about the sprint period. All the sheets follow the same format. There's a set of questions around the edge. The first couple of questions are set up. Then they ask you to consider what happened, ask you to consider what you could do, and then narrow it down to some things you actually will do. So I say they're all free on the website, all the retrospective sheets and these. These are modified because you haven't got anything in common. Although maybe you two were together and you two were together. If you don't have something in common, it's difficult to have a retrospective about something. So these 2 sheets take as their discussion topic Agile. Whether you love it or loathe it, they just talk about what do you like about Agile, what's problematic, etc., etc. I often use them at the end of a training course. I give them to a team and say, right, go and spend an hour from the things we've talked about for the last day or 2. What do you want to do? Our basis of their actions. The 2 sheets over here are more general. They are more general about software development. I don't think they actually say Agile. They just say, talk about some stories of projects you've seen work and projects you've seen go bad, and what would you recommend? This one in the middle is a little bit different. This one is intended for a team that was starting a piece of work to get them to talk about how they might work. There's 8 of you in the room, so we could put you all on one sheet. I think it might work best if we put 4 of you on one sheet and 4 on another sheet. Who would like to do the Agile sheet? 3, 4, 5. Would you like to do the Agile? You can all do the Agile sheet, or you can try the other one. You want to do the Agile sheet? Yeah. Okay, so let's use these 2 tables. Just physically move yourself. Hopefully, there's nothing more for me to do. You can self-organise. The questions guide you around it. Do you want to, some people want to take that table. So if we have 2 groups of 4, yeah. When you have more people, it tends to take a little bit longer. We've got an hour to do this in, so I think if we keep it to 4 people, we should finish in time. Just familiarise yourself with the sheet. Perhaps read through the quotes on the 3 sides. They are designed to be humorous and thought-provoking. And then whoever is closest to question 1, just read it out and follow the instructions. I'm here if you get stuck. People very rarely get stuck with this.
Just put it around
I've got some coloured pens I'll give you. They make the sheet a bit more live. sheet. You all use the same sheet, you all write all over the sheet. Whenever a thought occurs to you, write it down.
I think so, yeah.
Very democratic.
Got the first sentence.
So it's saying that this DAO sheet is designed to promote good conversation. Team members should see themselves equally around the sheet, so each question can be read by at least one person easily. Take one question at a time, skip questions if you like. The person who asked the question should read out the question and take notes of the discussion. Each person should get a chance to read and know at least one question. This is the first step. Someone said, make sure everyone has a pen to write on this sheet. Yes, we write on this sheet.
Yep.
Yeah, okay. Write anywhere and everywhere on this sheet. Agree how long you will spend working on this sheet. Okay, trees like this like. Space bar, list the agile and dislike. Why do you like them? Next list of those you dislike. Why do you dislike them?
So I suggest you two pull your chairs around here a bit. Just move my contact details out of here. So yeah, evenly space yourself. Okay. So you each get one side of the sheet.
Questions? What questions do you have about Agile, or any question you have on this sheet? 5 is Agile now, not Agile, like practices and processes are you following at the moment? Risks, what risk do you see in Agile? What risk would you encounter if you do more Agile practice and techniques? Struggle, what makes your current work difficult? Where do you struggle? Do you struggle with Agile traditional process? You know, go for that.
Yes. Benefits. What benefits of agile working would you like to gain? 9, here to help. How do you think agile can help? 10, for the people. Do you think that your co-workers and managers who are not here now will improve your answers to the previous questions, and how will they answer? It's doing it. Which agile practices and processes do you think you can adopt tomorrow?
So 12 more, which agile practices do you think would help, but you can't adopt immediately? What is stopping you adopting immediately? What help do you need in adopting more agile style of working? Do you need any equipment, tools, or permissions? What blocks or obstacles do you see to working in agile? 15, the action from the previous discussions. Which 3 things will you do?
Alright, so we finish with that.
Yeah.
Okay, that's the goal, the result we need. Yes, so we start from here now. Ben.
Number 3, the first one.
You specify a list of the agile ideas you'd like. Why do you like them?
So how long we're going to spend working on this sheet? We should agree on that. I understand that's right. Half an hour.
Half an hour?
Half an hour.
So if we aim to finish about 1:45, that'll be 15 minutes to wrap up.
Yep. Cool.
Half an hour?
Yep, sounds good.
Fine. So we need to take one question.
On time,
How do you define
finish our course at 1.
Other questions are there?
Take this question. It's the first question.
Okay.
What do you like about agile?
Yeah,
So you write those things down. So I think one of the things I like is visibility of team progress. So visibility is possible. Anyone?
Yeah.
I presume so. Do we just all write down randomly?
So do we discuss them like that? Or should we just
I think we first list.
I wonder if we just try writing some stuff down, and then at the end of each question, reviewing that.
Or just anyone? Or
Yeah, all of us. Yeah, we'll just write on all of us here. It's one of the things
I've got,
I've found
number 3
with retrospectives that some people don't like to talk.
Yeah, or they don't like at all to be there.
That's right, yeah. So getting them to write down stuff, potentially anonymously, but you can't do that.
No.
how the standards are
Yeah,
organized.
yeah.
And you identify blockage, but it's
Yeah,
sort of
so
part of the
visibility,
functionality part, so, but you have another discussion and you find blockages.
Did you agree? We're talking about what we like in Agile.
Should we just keep moving to the next question? Yeah.
Transparency. I think
What
that
questions do you have about record any questions you have in this?
Ability to change and react to
yeah, okay.
business needs.
Yeah, of course.
Unless they have got continuous improvement and empowerment of teams, raising.
I think the thing with in terms of skills, following that BA, so if I'm analyzing or understanding the shift in the requirements, or as a shift something that is not development, then
Some dislikes.
Oh, yeah.
these guys kind of held.
Long time for meetings or discussions. All that, something like that.
Problem is always the lack of how it's implemented. There's always it's not 100% implemented, and business side often they're not adhering to the rules of it. That's not like a problem with agile management, like a problem with the organization.
So not all people buy into the agile philosophies. So as people.
It's quite often.
There's
a project.
Yeah.
The visibility of a project plan.
Yeah, agile contracts. Customer, managing customers. Expectations. Integration of customers. I think these are not my dislikes, but they're just pain points.
You can think of.
So I was going to change management involved. This is migrating traditional BAs or project managers.
Yeah, number 4. What questions do you have about Agile? Record any questions you have on this sheet. Okay, so we're supposed to write.
Yeah, but I think we have to sort of after like show them. Put that there.
Look, visibility.
I think that should be enough for now. What question you have about that? What any question you have on this sheet? Type of question.
How simple is it to
Take a few minutes to read the quotes on the edge of the sheet. They should be using the party.
how far should we go?
Questions do you have about agile?
Should we follow all the principles? Some.
Problem I have, or the question I have maybe that, how do we plan? It's always planning and story points, for example, it's not simply we don't know it's not right.
Yeah.
Yeah. That was an interesting talk beforehand.
Yeah, exactly. So
Not sure whether I agree with it, but
I think it's at the end it's really a bit frustrating for the business to come up with that.
yeah, I think So the questions I have is that you've got, when starting teams, they need to go on a journey, and when you get to that end of journey and they're really good, then you can migrate to.
So the question is more like, how do you do that? Or
Yeah, how do you get, because most agile training is about raising people's understandings of the process, and you can't just create an agile team
Easier to just
and then expect them to function straight away.
Yeah, and then replace it next to each one.
They need to have a look into everything. So a very good agile team.
run out of space.
how do you know the team is very good?
They deliver.
Okay. That's a good answer, I guess.
Yeah.
Should we just start in number 5?
Yeah.
I don't think you can compare easily teams in Agile. And these teams do better than this one.
Okay. This is probably just more of a discussion. So what questions do you have? How valid are the agile certifications? Scrum Master, certified Scrum Master, certified. Yeah, because I'm going to be a certified
They're very
dialogue
valuable if you're looking for a new job.
That's right. I'm going to be a certified agile discussion dialogue sheet. Remember the series.
That's
If you're looking for a new job, they're very valuable.
it's kind of.
I think they're a load of rubbish, but
Yeah. Pyramid selling schemes, the expression is.
yeah, or they're awful.
Yeah, we're supposed to.
But people who have no relevance to
it's
it.
dysfunctional. So,
You know
so
that it takes
we used to
24 hours of
once I was
16 hours in a
more
classroom to get
like
a Scrum Master. And it takes
DevOps
20 hours
part
of training from a Starbucks
the
barista.
team, but then we also
Go figure.
I did my certified Scrum Master about
Now
10
we're
years ago, and it was the word. It was
a bit
interesting.
lacking on
Yeah,
the
certificate.
structure part. So
I did it before a couple of years. Now I think it's something you need to learn. It's not like you get a certificate, boom, then you're really good at that.
No, I
With the
consider
experience.
myself a good Scrum Master after.
yeah, then that's the stuff. Spring structure of the meeting as
Yeah.
well.
And anything about Scrum
Yeah,
Master.
yeah, that's
Something.
yeah.
I'll let you get on with this. We'll talk about all that.
Questions? Do we have any questions?
So, questions. Do you want to put planning,
Here.
resourcing? So I have, I work in a computer games company. So we have creative people in our Scrum teams, artists, sound engineers. How's that process being done?
So the question is more, how do you work with
Cross planning, planning in a functional team, that are typically non-software.
I mean, the people who aren't necessarily committed to the project, but you can't necessarily give somebody a schedule of when you need them,
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
in an agile you want.
So we wouldn't have a sound engineer on the project all the time.
Yeah.
So it's a fixed team. We can't have a fixed team. Which breaks all the agile rules, other questions? This is probably all the flavours of agile, which is the lean, Kanban, Scrum, Scrumban.
Which do you do?
Yeah, you need change how.
Philosophy or a doctrine, maybe that would be a good.
Good question is how do you know if a project fits to Agile? It's not like all projects should use Scrum or Kanban or Agile. How do you choose that? How do you
Yeah.
now technologies do that for long term and why?
Yeah.
Cool. Enough questions now. What Agile practice and process are you looking for? Need to answer each person.
Yeah, I mean,
appreciating if you can actually see others show.
So you can put the context during testing.
Manage to point to them. That's or get people to change that at least would be easier. If you know the bottlenecks, then
Whether that's an agile or waterfall.
Things like MVP form.
Yep.
you're aware other aware already. Yeah. Should we just go to risks? What risks do you see?
Agile like practices.
What risks would you
Continuous improvement.
do more agile practices techniques? Actually, the one you pointed out would be great risk. Yeah, there could be too much change at once.
I suppose the ceremonies, you can talk about those in terms of agile like practices, daily stand-ups.
Yeah. One doing retrospectives review.
So you think more of an evolution?
Have agile management.
Yeah.
Retrospective. The roles. Scrum Master, Product Owner. Sounds fairly obvious, but we've got clear rules that every project must have a Scrum Master and a Product Owner,
Exactly.
and they can't be the same person.
We tend to see that as doing very much a development role, whereas that isn't.
Okay. Yep.
No, but that's like with
Because our Scrum Masters
system
don't typically know much about
One task. Do you
development.
change Scrum Master different days?
Yep.
or
Yep. They're not subject matter experts. These guys are subject matter experts.
Do they have any other role in the company, or they're just Scrum Master?
Scrum Masters are quite. Sometimes they can be testers in the team, mainly, but they're more traditionally they're just more Scrum Masters, keeping the process going.
No.
Facilitators. And it's a diminishing role as a team matures. So at the start of the project, that for us becomes quite it's a big role, getting everything going, facilitating everything, but the product owner role gets harder and harder.
Further, what risk do you see in agile? What risk would you encounter if you do more agile practices?
managers
I guess if you're
often doesn't
making
know how
the change to agile,
works.
Yeah.
you've got to convince the organisation that that's the way you're going.
Change
If you're a traditional business, you're making the change, and once you do something different, that carries risk.
So, yeah, the interesting thing is that if you're doing that, you need the risks are lack of buy-in from management.
I think you also need to train or learn your customer as well.
Yeah.
We had that problem as a manager, and then we were an issue with our customers. Traditional ways to do expectations.
Yeah.
And now they need to deliver each, or need to manage to deliver each sprint bit at least.
Yeah.
Show that to the customer needs to understand that.
Yeah. Different understanding of what agile means. So with people you're working with. So some people think having a stand-up.
It's a waste of time.
Yeah. Well, actually, just having a stand-up means that you're agile and you're meeting every. The risks. I think one of the biggest risks is
which person choose to be the product owner?
It puts a lot more pressure on the product owner. So it's where Agile falls down is not because our team can't deliver, it's because they're delivering. The product owner doesn't know what.
Yeah, because it's not
matter how efficient you are, if you don't do one thing.
it's not good enough to to manage
Yeah.
the expectation what needs
Yeah.
to be done.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm not sure
The
if
product owner
that's
has
more-
to understand the needs and the parameters of the business and get that right.
Yeah.
It's more like a issue, you know.
and also
So they've got to really. So it's like having this great team here, but they've got to understand how to use that team.
I don't think that would work. Yeah.
And
No, I don't think, I don't know how you could apply.
I think it probably comes back down to migrating the traditional PMs and BAs.
Number of minutes.
They will
keep
potentially overthink some things and not enough detail on another.
So I guess
So what is the risk of
in
that?
some organizations, Agile wouldn't work.
Spinning, losing focus. You know, you're still delivering something, but you're not getting.
The right things.
Yeah.
Know the same thing. So but I think it would be for higher level.
So what are the other risks? Yeah. Oh, yeah. That's a good point. Is you're only building according to the current
Still got that vision.
vision. Yeah. I think one of the risks is that the projects become developer led. This is that relation of the product owner not being strong enough to prioritise.
What makes your current work difficult? Where do you struggle? Do you struggle with Agile?
We need to have line managers as well. It's not part of the Agile.
Yeah, still need line
Yeah, you
management.
still need line management.
I think one of our main conflicts
The risk is how to make work that with
something you need to
Agile.
do, but
Yeah.
it's not
They
part of
still
the
some people think
what
that
you should
if
do.
line
So
management is boss of the people.
if we could
Let's get into the realms of matrix management. She's got
Yeah, it is. The product.
where
Yeah, so that just
a lot of
talking
us,
about the product owner is quite often seen as the
other
boss,
responsibilities
whereas rather
more
than a
as
team
part of
member.
DevOps. So we also have critical solutions which are already
Is that a risk of agile?
which are in production already.
Where does it all go?
And failures and other
It's
upgrades.
so
need to
if you change management to remove the
developers
team
are
and the team become almost a unit in themselves.
Yeah.
You then end up where you don't control the technical disciplines necessarily
Yeah.
in terms of being able to execute your expectations and standards of that area.
Yeah.
We're not really finished with the solution. Even though
It's still not down necessarily to the
we need sorry? No. Some parts we have.
People more Agile operations,
But
Yeah.
other parts.
it's the same thing also in the beginning. People they ask me,
It's a lot harder to
or
develop
something like that.
I think most people
If
go
you don't know why you change,
There's more reason to
then it's a train of
the operations team than actually
make it easier.
basically yourself.
people who have no knowledge of Agile but have heard of it into a project with a preconceived vision of
Yeah.
what it actually means, and there's far more to it.
Risks are seen as a silver bullet.
Yes.
Waste of space, waste of.
You underestimate the technical and discipline required to create an agile team, because it's perceived that agile is almost like chaos. Just do whatever you like, whenever you like. Whereas it's actually far more disciplined. You've got to get people to think and run a process themselves. So in waterfall, you just get, right, go with those, going to do that, and get on. Whereas this is, so I'm just wondering whether another thing risk is not all developers suit an agile development environment. So some don't like it.
I think Agile should work for almost everyone because it's based on the team, not on the person.
Yeah, some people don't, not team players.
Although, yeah, but still they need to fit in.
Yeah.
Sometimes it expose weaknesses though, in that you might have some people who are maybe not as strong as to come into it, because they're forced to work in a very open environment, which mitigates risks. We have that situation where it's developed a head down for days trying to solve a problem, but not
Yes.
knows the answer to. It just takes away.
So,
When we switched to Agile, people like Agile. We're going to develop that, but
it's hard to
no one uses it.
make it. If you buy this one, you could pick this
But as
up.
soon as everyone can see what it's
Then
doing,
with this that would be with us.
but no one will have to use it.
Can you see
Should we move on to the next one?
Yeah.
Is your current work difficult? Do you struggle with agile or traditional processes?
Always doing other stuff. It's not
I
part
think
of
marrying up the two worlds of business who work in a traditional manner
Yeah.
and still make commitments to a client, and marrying that up with agile delivery,
Yeah.
so that you can
Fixed
fit
time,
with a
fixed
project.
time, fixed
Yeah.
budget.
You can fit with a project plan, but how do you give the person controlling the project plan what they need?
Yeah.
Finding that maybe
Yeah, so maybe it's sort of it's the realities of working, because I think if you've got your in-house project and you can manage your team's and your sponsors' expectations, that's great. But if someone is paying you for 3 or 4 months, I want all of these built, they're expecting to see that built for that much money.
Well, that's again one issue. How do you, like you said, how do you
Yeah.
build one? That's one of the things we have. Also, difficult situations where we're building one and
Yeah.
Scrum, the release management of the features, is not always
Yeah.
so easy to one and especially
Yeah.
especially for new teams.
Is that you said the requirements change?
So is the
requirements as well?
is it commercial
So changes mid
obligations versus agile
in the middle of
delivery?
sprints and
I think so.
similar.
Because what we it's a commercial one, because I think we tend to have 2 types of development projects. There's those where it's just developing further capability
Yeah.
within our platform to make it a better product or to new markets. And we have an easier time with Agile on those projects because we're masters of our own destiny.
Yeah.
And we determine where we pull, where the line is that we develop up to, and where we decide that we're no longer delivering value, we move on to the next thing. Versus things where there are commitments,
Yeah.
and it's external, it's tying in with other things. So
Yeah.
it's 2.
Yeah. It's one of those actually maybe something like external commitments versus.
It's quite
In that sense, it's just a question that there's always a constant change, and it doesn't necessarily mean. I mean, it doesn't mean that things don't get done. It's just that things tend to stop.
Yeah, how do you say to a client, look, just trust us. We think it's going to be about 6 months, but there's no guarantees.
It's always a bit interesting.
That's not how it works.
Yeah, and it may be completely different what you get at the end.
I haven't, but to see how the business side would make this that same. How do they believe develop the work?
benefits of Agile
Are they feeling
working
that
would you
consistent
like to
change
gain?
from
The whole
the
commitment.
Yeah.
The promise is lost.
Yeah.
I don't suppose that they don't really
Things are more like
change.
Yeah.
Whenever the business model desires
what's
Yeah,
now.
I've come to
Yeah,
those.
yeah.
Here to help. How do you think Agile can help?
So in terms of business and change, I think there is an understanding that it's for the benefit of I see it.
Yeah,
I think
this
it's
question
focus on
subset of this.
focus on priorities, visibility, what's going goals.
What benefits of agile working would you like to
All the
see?
people, that's interesting. Do you think your co-workers and managers who are not here now will agree with your answers to the previous questions?
One of my
Co-workers, you and you.
I think we will always have an internal
prioritized and organized
matter of
So
how agile business
when you're done
we
with
are
the task, you're
versus
also just take
they see the silver bullet.
Yeah.
Say you're not agile enough. What does that mean? We don't know what the
Yeah.
We're not flexible
That's one
enough.
of the
Or agile won't work here because it's
one of them. That's
agile only works under certain scenarios.
Yeah, but then you also if you got the backlog,
I think that tends to come back from the traditional project management managers.
Actually have a lot of the traditional issues getting in.
work should just be
We had a new CEO
continued.
came
You don't need to
from an agile background.
talk to other, you know.
We got bought out by private equity.
Yeah.
One of the things they tried to do to instill, to create value in all of their portfolio businesses was transition their development processes over to agile.
Yeah,
Yeah.
So we
it's
had
a
a
gross
strange,
simplification of how
we had
it
a,
actually work.
I guess,
I think that would be
people who had expectations that we didn't have to necessarily convince. So they're in a position of how much of this is delivered and
Yeah.
pressure to switch to agile. Their vision of what they think agile is.
Yeah.
Keys back to being a silver bullet.
So one of the challenges of agile is communication, communication, which and visibility. So
And I think it exposes the transition over, exposes other issues with
Yeah.
business quite often.
I would say
So
transparency.
agile exposes weaknesses. So when all of those problems were always there, as soon as you start using them, they're going to come
Understanding
to
what
the fore.
everybody's doing.
It doesn't solve them, it just exposes
It exposes them. And so one of the challenges is that exposing issues is seen as the being a fault of agile, not as the problems were always there before. What if that's
Good understanding.
testers, I think, see, perhaps I see it as a mixed blessing that they're involved much earlier on in the process.
Yeah.
But then I think we found that for the testers it was one of the harder journeys for them to
Yeah.
make. They worked in quite a structured and particular way.
Yeah.
To work directly with the developer testing something that perhaps they didn't have the full thing.
Yeah.
Was a challenge and something that I never quite think when talking to testers that they're fully bought in.
So we had the other way around is that we educated our testers right from the start. And so they really got the context of what they were trying to do. And it tended to be some of the developers who were really struggling with this all comes around this change management issues. And it impacts different teams in different ways.
But how do you implement something different? You have like our team should never have more than 4 tasks in progress, right? That's how.
So which agile practices or processes do you think you can adopt to
The one we already said.
How do you explain it?
It's tricky if you're already agile as well.
Yeah. Yeah.
There's things we can do better.
Yeah.
Change something.
One of the things that we moved to Scrum, and now we're moving towards more lean philosophies, which are, I think Scrum can be a delivery mechanism in there. But being able to create, and this comes down to the product owner being able to say, breaking down the problems, and then evaluate.
Yeah, there's really not food out here, but don't worry about that. You can squeeze out.
So, yeah, so maybe this is coming back to some of these other issues. The risks is that tools like Scrum are misinterpreted for what they actually do. Is Scrum a planning tool? For me, I look at it as purely as a delivery.
I think it is. I think that you don't take things into. There's 2 halves to agile. One is they're delivering something in as efficient, de-risked way as you can, and Scrum fits that. But the other side of it is the product management piece, grooming backlogs, which is product management, product owner. Because if that's not right, there's no point being efficient.
That's right, so that's why I tend to think you go through an evolution. So you get your Scrum teams all working quite nicely, and then realise that your product owners are not efficient enough, and that's why sort of you migrate to a more lean approach.
I'll go back to my one issue. How much do you plan your teams? How much time did you spend? Not only for the current sprint, I mean planning for future sprints as well.
So what we do is try and very, very detailed planning for the next sprint, but always bring in stuff that's 3-4
Far away,
and sort of high level. Hey, what do you think about this? What should we be doing?
Who's driving that? The product owner?
Product owner. It should be the product owner. But they tend to lose focus, and it comes down to visibility and communication. And exactly as I said, that's what you tend to get huge backlogs.
We have the same issue. I think we have that. We want to do that. I think for organization in each sprint for the next few sprints, and one for the current sprint at some point. Backing up. And then we change something over here, and then we just throw away half of it and do it again. So it's getting like circle where I feel never people will learn how to do that properly.
So how do you guys manage your backlogs? Do you do that paper-based or system-based?
What they're doing?
Yes, we use Jira.
Yes. One of the things that we struggle with that is what is
using the board as a
part
visualization.
of the product management returns very high level concepts versus deliverable user stories.
That's right,
So we haven't really got the balance of that right. And we've looked at possibly some tools upstream of Jira that we we keep the Jira backlogs cleaner,
Yeah.
with less things in, and there's a higher level that then feeds in.
Yeah.
But we haven't got there yet. We're looking at it thinking there's something not quite right here. Tool sets.
So it's Jira, TFS.
How are you using TFS?
So it's quite interesting. Most of the guys here say, throw those out of the window. Just use, well, not throw them out of the window, but card-based scenarios are a lot more effective.
We've tried that with posting notes. Whoa, that's
Yeah.
I think we then struggle with visibility.
Yeah.
If you've got to go to it, you've got to start looking through everything.
Yeah.
It's quite nice having something that we could just hit from the desktop. You can have some observers.
Yeah.
Who can look at it and see charts.
Yeah. I can see them in the planning stage, is there? That using cards would actually.
Point is always, tricky.
Yeah.
We sometimes ask people from different teams to join point sessions between the team, so they can share their knowledge. And look at different teams doing that. It's very funny how some teams do planning and others do completely different points.
Yeah.
It's kind of that different thing.
Yeah, we I've got a number of Scrum teams and they all take different approaches to their planning and their grooming.
I think that's one of the things about Agile, isn't it? That if you get too prescriptive in terms of how things happen, that you can lose some of the efficiency. You almost feel that teams have to settle into a routine of working that works within that, but within some boundaries.
Yeah.
You don't want to get too prescriptive with that. But sometimes
and managers
one of the troubles we have is with different teams. How do we get the learning of one team?
Let's put that down as transferring learning from one team to another. Because that's silos of learning, which I think is quite a big problem.
It's almost like trying to take some things up to a central point, which then becomes part of what everybody aspires to within business.
Yeah.
Alright. Next step.
More. Which agile practices and process do you think would help but you can't? Do you think would help but you can't adopt immediately? What is stopping you adopting them immediately? So let's.
Is there any practice that you're not adopting?
So it could be card-based versus system-based. No points versus pointing. Yeah.
I think sometimes the challenge is stopping for long enough to step back and change what you're doing rather than just roll in.
Yeah, so that I agree with that. Is that quite often meetings and communication is seen as a waste of time. Planning is seen as development. So I just want to be developing. I don't want to go into this meeting where it comes back to a product owner can remove scope, be more. You can get more efficient. You can firm the requirements. You're getting more. For me, it's all about efficiency. Building the right thing as quick as possible.
I think someone that would really
You need to be faster, finish in a few minutes.
Cool. Yep. We've got.
that might be someone better.
Cool. What help do you need in adopting more agile style and working? Do you need any equipment, tools, or machines?
What tools? There are a lot, I think.
Wall space.
That can be sometimes challenging.
Yeah, like a wall space. Visibility.
else on that? What blocks or obstacles do you see to working agile? We've covered that a few times, I think. Buy-in.
Just reading the comments online, that ways, but it's our meaningful work. So yeah, I believe
Training people to
Yeah.
about ways to
do it rather than just roll straight.
Yeah. I like a training would be a big, yeah. Do you want to grab that?
My
Organization one.
our project wrote
It's a
the
block.
head of our project manager, and he's
So traditionally you get a person who's a PM or something, throw them into an agile team and say, right, you're a product owner
not
for
working
this.
on the project,
And they get their Gantt charts
but
and
a manager which is responsible for
they struggle with it.
the entire team.
See, they're
It's
paying
meaningful
for
work.
Yeah.
So,
I know we do the
well,
same.
I shouldn't have said it.
Product owner to maintain a Gantt chart. And I sat there and looked at it and I think, this is just a document of what we've done. You're effectively just taking it from one place and putting it in.
Yeah.
So there's no value in this.
I think it's also teams are quite often still fed solutions rather than requirements into.
But this is always how I see it.
Yeah,
To do
yeah,
that rather
yeah.
than like
And don't have the strength to push. So the team, a good agile team, needs strength to push back.
That would be effortless.
And be supported in doing that.
You could after next because you could make
Support.
and just talk about what we've done. How to do it different.
What do they push back?
I think that's probably one of the easiest things to do.
Because otherwise, I think you don't get support from that. You just end up going into glorified waterfall.
I think in terms of
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
you want to be involved in that design process and do more than just the code.
Yeah. Okay, so from the previous discussions, which three things do you do?
well, I suppose it would be
three things.
Yeah.
Yeah. Revisiting estimate.
It's kind of a vague thing. It's really difficult because.
That's a lot of noise to abstract.
Yeah.
Many
Yeah.
agile framework.
Yeah. For business. I think that's too vague, too difficult to do, but I can see how it goes.
I think we answered the question. What we don't do right now is can't answer that.
Yeah.
I think it's easy to say we will improve.
Yeah.
That's the easiest answer, to be honest. Maybe not the clear one.
It's a cycle of continuous improvement.
We will just improve, Like always do that.
We should cure world hunger. We must cure Ebola.
Yeah.
We should stop fighting in Ukraine.
That'd be a good idea.
Yeah. Very good action points, aren't they?
Yeah.
Makes sense.
Cool.
Improve, deliver.
Yeah.
The front can be.
So what did you guys get out of this process here? Because I'm kind of evaluating what you've done. Here is a more useful tool.
We're going to talk about
Okay.
some of that. And
Okay.
well, we're almost on time. If you could come up with three things, that'd be useful. I say you can skip questions. It's more team.
All working together, yeah. I can see where that comes.
At the end of the training session, we take all these out and the people in the training session go through this.
Doesn't allow us to implement.
What do they want to do? Then we can drill down into them. What does that mean? And when you've got 2 or 3 groups, separate groups deciding some things and examples are the same as some different.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, I can see.
They're almost finishable. Then we'll feel free to talk or revisit.
Okay, so with them would be, I can't implement that.
The company's quite small. We've recently changed what we do considerably. So we're about 50 people in total. Probably about 30 of those the software, which is the technical side. What we do is we have like I said, a marketplace, which is a multi-tenant application that we deliver software service allows social landlords to transact their planned and responsive maintenance programs on it. So maybe replace 200 roofs, so set a project up on our software. Suppliers will have their catalogue on that software. The contractors will go and call merchants, and we just create transparency so that we can make sure that any purchasing agreements are all executed exactly as they should be. Any sort of deals that were made with manufacturers of specific products, cashback things, are collected in full at the end of it. Don't go be unclaimed, things like that, so people get value. So we have a mix of clients using the software to get transparency, visibility, plan projects, and professional services. So we specialise in procurement, tendering, and things like that. We did used to manage spend for buying groups, more involved in consortiums, but we sort of switched away to getting clients who would use those buying groups to use the software directly themselves. Because we had a few where we had a buying group of about £1,800 worth of spend every year going through. And one buying group walks away. Massive amount of transactional spend goes out.
So how do they make a fee or a margin?
A mixture. Some of them we do transaction fee, so very low percentage of money going through.
Yeah.
Some of the clients, it will be a license fee.
Yeah.
On that, and we make quite a bit of money for sort of service credits, support, and things like that.
Yeah.
And then additionally, we pick up lots of professional services around that. So we'll have some services where we sit down with clients on a quarterly basis. Produce action plans based on what's happening in the marketplace. So we do a lot of value engineering, trying to say, okay, model spend, so you spend a lot of money in this area. Replace these products out with these, get better. But one of the things we're looking at the moment, which is we're trying to understand building all these things. How can we use that as an asset? A lot of that is looking at.
Could you do a lot of training?
Yes, well that's what we're trying to establish at the moment. A lot of our clients are trying to understand as a landlord. Spend what's my average spend on a bathroom project? How does that compare with the rest of the market? How does that compare with other contractors within the market? It doesn't give an answer as to what's wrong, but it gives us some So that's one of our next projects.
Cool.
But because we're private equity owned, we're trying to understand how to make a business worth more money.
This is a new one that tester, so I've modified it and I'll be releasing it more publicly soon, but I'm always looking for more guinea pigs for these things.
I do a mixture. We build games for Disney and Sony, mixture of games games, some mobile games, web games, games just to support. We worked on Where's My Water and Where's My Water 2.
They want to hide
then,
what they're really doing.
I've got other clients that we're doing games that stroke victims recovery, so that's going quite well. Child learning areas, and we also do gambling games.
Which three things will you do?
We've also got a
Perhaps
big
we'll-
tower defence game that we're going to release.
When it's an actual team
I'm
who's
excited
doing
about that in a few months' time.
that's more relevant. We can do it in this setting.
Good.
Given time, actually.
So gambling games.
So when you have an actual team who do this, because they do it at the end of training, or
Ah.
do it when they're new teams.
We're working with a company called Bettable.
Okay, shall we reconvene en masse?
Yep.
So do you four want to stand up and come over here and have a look at this sheet over here? So these guys got from the 14, I skipped 15, same as yourselves. Somebody from this group want to give us a quick summary of what were the main topics, the main points that came out of the discussion?
Go on. And I thought we came up with quite a lot of, I guess, fragmented views of Agile. I think we all come from very different backgrounds. I think we're all really participating or have Agile teams. So we all really had a view of that at the moment. But I think some sort of key things that came out of it were about the things we like in and around the visibility it gives us, but issues coming out from expectations of the business. Is it a silver bullet? Whether we've got the lack of buy-in, commercial teams out there that may be making commitments and working with clients that work in a traditional way and sort of want to see traditional plans. When am I going to get it? How do we mate what we're doing within an agile environment with that outside world and key those things together, and those being really significant challenges that we face with that.
Mm-hmm. Any of you got any new insights? Surprises?
I think it's a nice experience, to get the feeling what other people doing agile and see that they have the same issues as you, or they like it for the same reason as you.
Should we all move over there and look at your sheet? Sorry to rush you along, but lunch is coming upon us. So the guys over here, despite my prodding them, they decided they were going to write the answer to each question on a piece of paper, which you're quite at liberty to do. It's a self-organising sheet, a self-organising team, and I've seen other teams that put post-its on there. Now, this saves them about £15 a sheet, which is really big money for most of your employees because they're so tight with their salary. I personally prefer this working with written on it. You see the energy. In a retrospective setting, some teams will hang a completed sheet on the wall. But you're quite at liberty to do, because I prefer it that way. It doesn't mean it's the right way of doing it. Save the environment and all that. Somebody from this team, do you want to tell us what was the big topic in your
Well, I think that the main point we had was transparency. It came up several times, and I believe that was our most important points, I believe. So, about the different aspects of transparency is, that was, I think, one of the key features we liked, how we would benefit them.
Anybody else from this team want to highlight anything in particular?
I think from all the people's perspectives, which areas in terms of transparency, in terms of we also picked up on waste management in terms of being able to push and pull. It varies, and dependent on what stake you have on that particular point, it can vary, and it brings up the questions of, you know, what blockers are really in the way in terms of what we understand from one perspective and how somebody else may understand it from a different perspective.
It's interesting, at one point I heard this team talking about putting more emphasis on the product owner, needing more from the product owner, and over here I heard you guys talking about you need to have good developers on the team. Yeah, and that raises the question, is that a fault of Agile, or is that just things that, if you've got bad developers, you've got product owners who don't take up the responsibilities, or no one picks it up?
It's an Agile problem.
It's a general problem, it's just, you know, the visibility thing, Agile makes it more
I think
challenging.
Agile just surfaces those issues.
Yeah. Any questions about the sheets themselves? You find them, do you get stuck with them at all?
Fantastic work with that. But you have also sheets for retrospective.
Yes. Yeah. So in this setting, you've got nothing to retrospect about.
Yeah.
So these sheets kind of pose a different kind of question. So I originally got the original idea from Stockholm. You guys from Scandinavia? Norway. So you're next door neighbours.
Yeah.
So they originated in Stockholm. We're on universities there, and they're used in some educational work. I got the idea from Cass Business School here in London, who use it with entrepreneurs and innovations and stuff. I created a whole bunch of retrospective sheets around these. I believe there is a daycare centre in Stockholm where they get out one of my software retrospective sheets every 2 weeks and do a retrospective on how they've been working in daycare with children. You couldn't get much further away from software than that. So yes, the other sheets are more retrospective. This exercise is intended to kind of simulate the kind of discussion you'd have in the process. But the general idea of the sheets, there's lots of different settings, different topics you can use them in. Could you imagine your team, if the questions were geared around your sprint or your last project or your last release, could you imagine your team doing one?
The question, because we have remote teams as well, and meaning that not the team is physically in one location, like different people. How can we do that remotely?
How many locations do you have?
2 or 3.
2 or 3, and how many people in each location?
It depends on the team, but let's say 30% of the team can be in a different location.
How many people is that?
2, 3, 4.
Okay, so as a bit like the Siemens case I mentioned before, in each location, as long as you've got 3 people, you could probably try with 2, but my guess is 3 is a minimum. If you've got 3 people in each location, each one has their own copy of the sheet. Each one of them takes an hour. Then, when you've done it, convene on conference call, video conference, whatever. Take a photo of the sheet, send it to them, and as we've just done here, have somebody from each team just talk through the sheet. Now, the important bit with the retrospective, and the bit you all skipped, is those 3 things at the end. I think all the retrospective sheets finish by saying, which 3 things should you do? So in your kind of setting, you'd have the separate teams come down to 3 things. Now, hopefully, they all come up with the same 3 things. More likely than not, they will be a bit different. But maybe what you do is you say, well, the things that are in common, if they both come up with 3 things and they have 1 thing in common, maybe just focus on that 1 thing in common. Or maybe try and take 1 from each team, or some kind of voting process. It's not going to solve all the distributed problems. Nothing does. But it's another tool you can try.
Okay.
I believe actually using a retrospective like this might help us solve some problem.
Well, one of the things I hear said often from teams who use this is, those people on the team who tend not to say anything. It gets everyone speaking. And there's a couple of reasons for that. One, because you're all sitting around it. I mean, for starters, it is a little bit playful, isn't it? It's a little bit childish, and some people, because it's a little bit playful, it kind of brings that out in you. And because you all sit around it, you're all equal. There's no facilitator, there's nobody in charge. It's very democratic. And because you're writing on the sheet, and because everybody gets to ask a question, everybody gets to use their voice, it pulls this out of people. People tend to speak more. So one of the common things I hear is people saying they do this, and the people are normally quiet. Say something. I don't think it turns them into you know a disc jockey or you know a particularly elegant speaker, but it gets everyone at least to speak. That's why some of the questions, you know, you could say they overlap, and that's semi-deliberate. In part, it's a different view on the same thing, and partly it's also to give different people an opportunity to say things.
Sorry, if you have, in trying to avoid a blame culture in this sense, if you have, you know, line managers and things that are joining in the retro at the same time, how do you avoid that?
That's quite interesting. So one of the things I've observed is people who, you know, typically project manager types, they often position themselves close to number one, because they think somehow one is significant. And as you probably notice, 1 and 2 are about setting up.
Yeah.
And the power is given to all the people around here. Now, there's nothing to stop one person still dominating the conversation. But experience shows that people don't tend to dominate the conversation. You hear the occasional story, but usually, because you've got instructions to follow the sheet and let everyone have a go, people tend to give. But I say there's no way of guaranteeing that.
If you have one person who are dominant, and a quiet person said, "This is a problem." No, it isn't, and so it would shut that down. So.
You could, but they say the questions overlap a little bit. So if one person shuts down we've got here the benefits question. Oh, the benefits are obvious, let's move on. Hopefully the person who's got the here to help is going to say, well, it might help us with blah, blah, blah. Now, obviously, one person can have both of them, but perhaps one of the other questions, you know, other people, or perhaps blocks, you know, I don't know, overlap. What you could do if you've got people who you're a bit concerned about, you know the example I gave before, the team with the BAs and the testers on one side and the developers on the other. You could try and group those powerful voices. You'd be a little bit Machiavellian here. So there needs to be a little bit of facilitation. You might want to say, look, this week we'll have the developers over here and we'll have the managers over here. We'll have 5 developers over here, we'll have the product owner, the project manager, the development manager over here. And try it that way. Not to say that's always a form, you know, sometimes you might deliberately want to mix it up. But there's different ways of splitting it. But yeah, if you've got someone who's dominant, try it, because you often find this helps with that. Can't promise to cure it entirely.
Another question that comes to my mind: should we do that every retrospective meeting, or we can do it once when we want to just do a change and then do something different? What's your advice on that?
I think this is a retrospective technique. There's, you know, the books by Esther Darby, Patrick Coa, and the older one by Norm Kerr, with lots of stuff on retrospectives, which is still relevant. I think one of the things to keep retrospectives fresh and to keep new ideas coming is you do need to change the format.
Yeah.
I think if you did these every 2 weeks, you would get bored of them.
Exactly.
I think, and part of the reason I have several different ones is to try and vary it. I think you could sit, and I know of 1 or 2 teams that every 2 weeks get out my sprint retrospective sheet, and they do that every 2 weeks. Daycare people do that. Now, I can imagine at one point we'll get bored. You might try one of the other sheets, because the questions are slightly different. You might try something completely different. This is a tool. Try it once, it would be the firm advice I give you. If you like it, do it again, but don't feel as if they're going to be arranged. Don't feel as if you have to do it religiously each time. This is one tool, and there's many others.
How do you try with the subset of the people? If you would take some from product, some from developer, some. How?
Sometimes I mix it up like that. Sometimes I just go 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. All the 1s do one sheet, all the 2s do another. I just mix it up randomly. I've even been known, so when I do this on training courses, what I usually do at the end of the training course, we get this sheet out, and say, you're going to talk about what you like, what you want to do, and I say, stand next to the person in the room, stand next to the person you work most with, and furthest away from the person you work least with. And you find little clusters emerge of might be the developers, and it might be the managers, or it might be these are the people who tend to work on the front end, and these are the people who tend to work on the back end. And you give them each a sheet. And on one occasion, I had about 14 people in them. I really couldn't separate them. And I said the line up my birthday. And we did the people in the first half of the year on one sheet and the people in the second half on the other sheet. There's value to mixing people up randomly, and there's sometimes value to separating them out. It's all just mixing it up. Different people come with different ideas. Any final points? If you want to take, if anybody wants to take a sheet, please do, particularly the one you've written on, you're welcome to it. The URL is on here, dialogsheets.com. All you need to do is print. There was a print-on-demand service, but it wasn't used very much, so it wasn't worth the hassle. If you really get stuck, I'm sure your local corporate will help you. I think it's about £15 on average to get it printed. Some places actually have big printers in the building. My contact details are there. Feel free to contact me. If you want to pick up about one of my books or my other books, feel free. Or unfortunately, I've got to rush home and take over my kids and take them swimming lessons this afternoon, so I can't hang around for the conference. But my wife has a business trip, so I'm main childcare. So, but I'm happy to keep on answering questions. I also know your lunch is waiting for you.
Cool.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Cheers.